The United States was built on never creating a cult of personality that was often awarded to kings, queens, and dictators. However, that didn't mean they couldn't celebrate their leaders. Long after the death of former presidents, monuments have been erected in their honor. They exist all over the nation, from South Dakota's Mount Rushmore to the many presidential libraries, and finally to Washington, D.C., where numerous monuments exist. One such monument is the Washington Monument. Built in honor of the first president of the United States, George Washington, who is often hailed as the father of the United States, he was a celebrated military and political leader whose legacy has endured for centuries. So it should be no surprise that Washington has been celebrated and memorialized many times over since his time in office and since he died in 1799. The Washington Monument might seem simple in comparison to other monuments for former presidents and military leaders, but its story is similar to many great projects in the United States. Grand in ambition stifled by conflict and funding, yet ultimately succeeding in memorializing great leaders. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by James CJ, so be sure to show them some love as you deploy your likes and do all the things that help keep the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm going. Let's get to it. The idea to create a monument to George Washington started a while before his death, and before he'd even been elected president. He'd not even achieved the majority of his legacy as of yet. Still, he'd already earned the title of respected military leader for his efforts during the American Revolutionary War, which was won in 1783. The Confederation Congress wanted to honor him for his military career and authorized the erection of a statue of General Washington on a horse in the future capital city of the United States of America in 1783. However, Washington, D.C. was still under construction during these years and wasn't yet the nation's capital, so work on a monument to Washington wasn't on the table just yet, as focus was given to more important projects with a more practical purpose, like the Capitol building to house Congress and the White House, where the president would reside. On December 24, 1799, just 10 days after Washington's death, a different type of monument was proposed. One of the original ideas was presented by then Representative John Marshall, who wanted a tomb erected in the Capitol building. This became a crypt below the rotunda of the Great Dome, but was eventually canceled due to a lack of funds. Then in 1800, when the Jeffersonian Republicans took control of government following Thomas Jefferson's victory over the Federalist candidate, incumbent President John Adams, the monument was put on hold. This was because the Jeffersonian Republicans, while deeply respecting Washington, didn't like that he had become the face of the Federalist Party. This wasn't by Washington's design, considering he was nonpartisan and against political parties, even warning against them in his farewell address, fearing partisanship would lead to a spirit of revenge. For almost the entire 19th century, the idea of memorializing Washington in any way was considered controversial. This went well beyond the potential memorial, which at the time was nothing more than a statue. It also extended to his presence on money and the celebration of his birthday. Despite the efforts of some to shut the project down, the Washington Monument eventually would proceed. Still, over the course of the 19th century, it would face constant setbacks in terms of funding, disagreements over design, politics, and the issue of the Civil War. Fast forward to 1833, when a group of citizens took matters into their own hands, forming the Washington National Monument Society. Tired of Congress not making any progress on their own, they created a group and met for the first time on September 26 at Old City Hall, with Chief Justice John Marshall elected as the first president of the society. Marshall had long been a champion of honoring Washington, even writing a biography about him, with volumes 1 and 2 published in 1804. The early meetings were spent discussing how the society would operate and raise funds for the future monument, but they had yet to decide on its design. To raise funds for the monument, they had collection agents operating in each town and county across the nation, going door to door asking for money. While they initially hoped they'd be volunteers, they eventually had to settle on providing a small commission of 10% on all money collected. This was eventually raised to 15%. The society was imperfect in how it operated. In an effort to appear more democratic, it ensured donations couldn't exceed $1 per person to ensure poorer people didn't feel shamed by rich donors contributing more. Other mistakes they made when crafting their society's constitution included excluding donations from people of color and denying women as members or agents. Combined, these three measures most likely reduce the likelihood of donations, making it a slow process. Beyond the fundraising aspect of the society, they were also responsible for creating a monument worthy of the father of the nation. To achieve this goal, they held a nationwide design competition in 1836. It's unclear how many submissions were made, but in the end, Robert Mills won the competition. Mills had already designed some impressive buildings, including a monument for Washington in Baltimore. Along with the Treasury Building in Washington, D.C., Mills's winning design is largely what you see today. It's an Egyptian-style obelisk, standing at 600 feet tall, but the biggest differences were that it didn't feature a pointy top and also had a Greek colonnade surrounding it that was 150 feet high. The finished monument was to feature access for visitors, achieved by a steam-powered engine pulling carts back and forth. So why didn't all these ideas come to fruition? Part of the reason things changed was financial issues. The society had always professed issues with collecting money, and by 1838 they had only achieved $28,000, which is equivalent to just under $1 million today. This was far from their desired goal of $1 million, $28 million in today's dollars. To help raise funds, they removed the donation cap and invested the money in stocks, bonds, and banks, growing it to $87,000 by 1848. While still a far cry from what they needed, it was enough to convince them to break ground and finally get started on a monument decades in the making. On April 18, 1848, the building of the Washington Monument officially commenced. The society was surely thankful that, in all their financial woes, land acquisition was not something they had to contend with, thanks to Congress. To facilitate the project, they donated the stretch of land south of the White House for the monument to reside. The land they were provided at the time wasn't anything spectacular. It was a low hill surrounded by pine trees and a few hundred feet from the Potomac River. The National Mall, as we know it today, was not what it was at the time. Instead, the area was uneven, undeveloped, disorganized, and in part swampy. So the Washington Monument was part of the starting point for the future of the Grand National Mall that would come into existence over the course of the early 20th century. In the early days of construction, workers removed the hill and dug a hole to create the foundation for the obelisk. The site's proximity to the Potomac River worked to its advantage, as the stone blocks were delivered to the construction site. On July 4, 1848, a ceremony was held to lay the cornerstone. It was presided over by President James K. Polk and attended by numerous members of Congress. A zinc case was placed in the cornerstone to serve as a time capsule, which to this day has never been opened. Inside, it contains newspapers from across the country, a set of coins of the era, a Bible, speeches, books, a portrait of Washington, and a medal. We don't know the specific titles of books or which speeches made their way inside. We also don't know exactly what the medal is for. It's likely a commemorative medal honoring Washington. Progress on the monument's construction was initially promising. By April 20th, 1849, the foundation was finished, with the shaft exceeding the 10-foot level. By the end of the year, the shaft was 50 feet, and a 70-horsepower steam engine was being used to hoist the stones to the top of the structure. However, while progress was being made on the monument, some things hadn't changed. The society, despite all its efforts, was still struggling to raise funds for the project. They placed donation boxes everywhere, offered souvenirs for donations, and more, but still found donations slow. As a result of these financial woes, the proposed colonnade surrounding the obelisk base was dropped and expenses were cut wherever possible. Going beneath the surface of the monument reveals the cut costs and corners. The composition of the walls is the most obvious indication of this. The outer layer, made of marble, was to give the appearance of a solid structure. The inner layer, while strong, was made of cheaper gneiss stone. Finally, between these layers, the society ordered it to be filled with the leftover pieces of gneiss, the rubble. The monument was not solid. While a standard practice at the time, this wasn't necessarily how it was initially proposed. If things didn't change, the Washington Monument was in danger of being abandoned. For how long? Well, that was anyone's guess. The next few years were not easy for the society, which continued to contend with the same issues that had plagued the project from the start. They were doing their best with the budget they had, which was woefully inadequate. Unfortunately, by mid-December 1854, the society announced defeat, and the building of the Washington Monument would cease. By this point, they'd spent about $230,000, equivalent to $8.1 million today, and achieved a height of 152 feet. The project, after many years of operating on the precipice, was officially in turmoil. The next few years would see many efforts made to get the project back on track. Congress contemplated authorizing $200,000, $71 million today, for the project, but ultimately never moved forward with the plan due to issues within the society itself. In 1855, the society was taken over by the American Party, also known as the Know-Nothings, as they'd always answer the question of their activities as "I know nothing." The party was a nativist movement that disliked Catholics and believed the Pope wanted to control America. They rose to power in the society in response to Pope Pius IX's donation of a commemorative stone. After buying their membership, they overwhelmingly voted their own people into officer roles. The original society initially refused to recognize the results and ended up creating two societies operating at the same time for the same project. This chaos caused donations to plummet as nobody wanted to contribute to the mess. The Know-Nothings began using rejected marble lying around the construction site for the monument, which resulted in 3 feet being added to the grand total. In 1858, the original society regained control and began the next effort to restart work. Following the chaos of the last 3 years, 1859 saw renewed interest in the project, but this time women wanted to be involved. This resulted in the creation of the Ladies Washington National Monument Society, which was created in Chicago. They released a statement noted as an appeal to the people regarding the statement of the monument's construction. The monument of George Washington remains unfinished in the capital of the republic he founded. Do you revere his name and memory? They began collection efforts, but their appeal had clearly fallen on deaf ears. They struggled to gain any traction and collected nowhere near the level of money raised by their male counterparts, finally disbanding in 1863. Unfortunately, Washington's monument would have to wait. The country had something more important to deal with: the Civil War. The Civil War diverted everyone's attention from the monument and just about everything else. In 1861, construction had ceased, and author Mark Twain described the unfinished monument as looking like a hollow, oversized chimney. It wasn't until over a decade later that President Ulysses S. Grant authorized the continuation of construction as per Congress's legislative actions. In 1876, a law was passed by Congress ordering the resumption of construction on the monument, with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers taking over the project and further funding the monument $200,000, equivalent to roughly $7.5 million today. Leading the charge was experienced builder Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lincoln Casey, who'd done a lot of fort building during the Civil War, as well as building the Library of Congress. Before they could continue construction, they needed to do some work on what already existed. The Army Corps strengthened the foundation of the monument, which had proven inadequate for the expected weight of the final structure. They also replaced some of the original gneiss material with concrete. Finally, the foundation was reinforced with more concrete. In terms of the actual existing structure, Casey made a point to remove the stone provided by the Know-Nothings, which was inferior. He even removed 2 feet of stone beyond that which was part of the Washington National Monument Society's efforts due to weather damage. As a result of the Army Corps of Engineers taking over, you can see where the work of the society ends and the Army Corps begins, as evidenced by the material changes in terms of sourcing the stone, which is slightly different in color. And I've seen it myself, yes, you can tell. On August 7, 1880, President Rutherford B. Hayes dedicated the second cornerstone, as the original had been covered by concrete, and the project resumed construction at 150 feet. Unlike prior efforts, this time things moved along steadily. They did end up reducing the planned height of the monument from 600 feet to 555 feet. The Washington Monument was finally completed on December 6, 1884, nearly a century after it was first proposed. The final piece of the monument was a 9-inch aluminum pyramid on top of the white marble tower inscribed with Laus Deo, which means praise be to God. At the time, aluminum was a rare resource due to technology not being advanced enough to extract it from the ore. Additionally, windows were added at the top on all 4 sides, just below the cap, at 500 feet in what is now known as the observation room. While not originally part of the initial designs, they were added in when construction resumed in 1879. With this, the impressive monument of some 36,000 blocks of granite and marble reaching 555 feet into the air, dedicated to the first U.S. president, was completed and resided in the city named after him. On February 21, 1888, a day before Washington's birthday, a dedication ceremony was held with speeches and a parade celebrating the monument and the leader whom it honors. At the time of its completion, the Washington Monument was the tallest building in the world until the Eiffel Tower took the title a few years later. It remains the tallest building in Washington, D.C., with a law passed in 1910 that limited heights to no taller than the width of the adjacent street, plus 20 feet, ensuring the monument's status in the district as the tallest structure would remain unchanged. In just 6 months following its opening, 10,000 people climbed the 897 steps inside to get to the top. This number grew to 55,000 monthly by 1888, when the elevator began operation. The monument, which nearly didn't exist, was a hit. The 20th century was a relatively quiet time for the monument, with blips of activity here and there. The structure did show signs of its early construction methods coming to fruition in negative ways early into the 20th century, with one incident occurring where material began oozing from the outer stones. At the time, it was called geological tuberculosis, and yes, that is really funny. It's basically a result of the cement and rubber filler weathering over time due to the damp, dry, and hot weather conditions because it was built in a swamp. It didn't result in any major damage, but instead dissolved and dripped down the side of the outer surface, solidifying as it dripped. The Washington Monument, since the Army Corps took over, has endured numerous repairs. Between 1998 and 2001, it underwent one of the most extensive restoration projects of its lifetime, working on the exterior and interior stonework. A major change was the interior stone being covered in glass to prevent vandalism, along with new windows with narrower frames installed to ensure increased viewing space. Additionally, a new elevator cab was installed, resulting in the project lasting until February 22, 2002, with a final cost of $10.5 million. Something else happened in 2001 in Washington, D.C. and the country at large: the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 attacks hit Washington, D.C. directly, with a plane crashing into the Pentagon. For years following that fateful day that started the War on Terror, America wasn't sure when or where the next attack would take place. What they did know was that it was likely to be another symbol of America, and the Washington Monument was one of the many symbols on the list of potential targets. One of the early security concerns tackled was the potential for terrorists, foreign and domestic, bringing explosives carried in a car or truck to the site. To deal with this potential threat, sunken walkways surrounding the monument were created to encircle the monument, costing $20 million. Additional security measures were taken, such as bags being searched and metal detectors installed. Up until 9/11, the Washington Monument was receiving over 1 million visitors a year, topping 1.1 million per year between 1979 and 1997. In 2005, it was decided to cap the number of visitors to 631,000 a month due to security and safety concerns. After 2010, these restrictions were loosened due to the addition of a security pavilion, as well as safety protocols and visitor flow improvements. However, on August 23, 2011, at 1:51 p.m., a 5.8 magnitude earthquake hit 90 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. in Virginia, causing significant damage to the monument. Mortar and pieces of stone fell, causing injuries on the ground, and numerous cracks began to form all along the four sides of the obelisk. Upon further inspection, the damage included roughly 150 cracks all over the monument, a debris field at the base, significant interior damage, and damage to the elevator, preventing it from progressing beyond the 250-foot mark. The National Park Service declared the Washington Monument closed indefinitely as repairs were made. Yet another closure in its short existence, this one due to an act of God and not the sins of the past. In just a month of inspection from August 24th to September 26, over $200,000 was spent. Work on repairs hadn't even begun yet, with an interior inspection still needing to be completed. The monument remained closed until May 12, 2014, as repairs continued for years, ultimately costing roughly $15 million, half of which was taxpayer funded. Despite repairs finishing in 2014, the monument was plagued with issues as a result of the earthquake for many years following the disaster. Into the 2020s, closures became all too common, with issues coming up every few years. The most significant issue was the elevator, which proved unreliable, resulting in it being closed from August 2, 2016 until September 19, 2019. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, the park closed on March 14, 2020. It reopened in October that year before closing again in January 2021 due to the January 6 Capitol attack, Reed insurrection, and credible threats to visitors. It remained closed after that due to new COVID fears and remained closed until July 14th that year. For over a decade, the Washington Monument was closed more than it was open following numerous repair issues. It didn't stop visitors from coming to the Capitol to see the impressive structure, which was still a sight to behold from the outside, assuming it wasn't covered in scaffolding at the time. I believe when I saw it, it was still covered in scaffolding. Washington is the most memorialized president in the United States, and it's not difficult to understand why. His face is plastered on a mountain, statues, and even the dollar bill. His name is on a state, the nation's capital, along with counties and municipalities around the country. It all culminates in the Washington Monument, a towering obelisk that is historically a symbol of strength, leadership, and endurance. It is the perfect ode to Washington, the perfect symbol of America. For nearly a century, its very existence was almost a question for which nobody really knew the answer. Once it was completed, though, it set the tone for everything that followed. Besides Washington, only 2 other presidents are heavily honored in the Capitol, Lincoln and Jefferson. The monument for the first president may not have his face, but make no mistake, everybody knows who the obelisk is honoring. It's the first thing I saw when I moved here, actually. And the first thing I said was it looks very phallic, which, yeah. It does. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical monument we haven't covered yet, subscribe, and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important locations. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.